Hello, my name is Pete Tseronis, and I am super excited to be the moderator today for what I believe will be an amazing discussion, a discussion that will touch on education and information and enlightenment, joined by my two iconic figures, as I like to think of them, Mr. David Owens and Mr. Morgan O'Brien. We're going to talk a bit about the grid of tomorrow, how the utility and telecommunication infrastructure play a major part in underpinning this type of architecture. And we hope that for all of our listeners today that you have a few light bulb moments, because these two gentlemen truly have lived it and are helping shape our next generation, not just infrastructure, but workforce. David Owens is the current, if you will, vice chair of the board for the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. And those of you who have followed him throughout his illustrious career is the former executive vice president at the Edison Electric Institute. You can read about David's bio. It's very lengthy and incredibly impressive. Equally, Mr. Morgan O'Brien, the founder of Nextel and the executive chairman at Anterix, has had an incredible walkabout. I've had the pleasure of knowing Morgan and his background as well, what he's done to influence industry, and now embarking on helping our utilities become a much more resilient community powering our country and our world is awfully amazing, and we will get into a lot of that. To frame the discussion today, we will be using acronyms. We'll be using terms like critical infrastructure, the network of networks. We're going to talk about public policy. We may reference a few laws and regulations that these two gentlemen can wax poetic about, but I'm hoping that aside from occasionally having to politely put a hook in there to add a little bit of color, I worked at the Department of Energy for 8 of my 25 years in government. I was the chief technology officer, and if that gives a little bit of credibility, I appreciate it, but I'm just super honored to drive the discussion today. We'll distinguish words like resilience from reliability. We'll talk security. We're going to talk about the ecosystem, and we're going to go from there and then some. I do have to say one more time as a shout out to both Morgan and David, these folks are pioneers that you're going to hear from today. I mean, they have founded companies, they've led their leadership. People want to follow both individuals, and I always like to share a little bit of personal. Morgan, not just a Georgetown University graduate in classical studies and having a law degree from Northwestern University. He's an incredible conversationalist and a storyteller, and I love it. And then you'll hear a bit about Anterix. And my new good friend, who I've had the pleasure of getting to know, Mr. David Owens, Howard University, George Washington University, Harvard University. We share a Philadelphia tie, went to Villanova, so I'm excited about all of that. That's it. I promise not to suck any more air out, but let's start with David. I just see you right here in the middle on my screen. Did I do an okay job sort of presenting you, and what are some of your thoughts on the topics we'll address today?
You did do a superb job, but you forgot to say I'm disappointed in our Philadelphia Eagles.
Ah, well, hey, you got a quarter. Yes, the quarterback problem's an issue, but that's common in Washington, just for the record.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to participate today. And it is a very exciting topic. I've been in the electric business for over 40 years. And I would say that what we are dealing with today is probably the most exciting period, at least in my career. Right now, as you indicated, I'm working very hard in Puerto Rico trying to rebuild the electric system as a result of Hurricanes Maria and Irma, which occurred in September of 2017. In fact, I had retired from Edison Electric Institute in June of 2017, and about, I would say in August, I got a call from a good friend who said, "David, what are you doing?" I said, "You just woke me up." I said, 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm retired, man. I need you to come to Puerto Rico. What do you need me to come to Puerto Rico for? I need you to help us out. So I've been helping out in Puerto Rico. I chaired a Transformation Advisory Council to bring back electricity, which was out for many customers for about a year. The fundamental thing that I'm doing now is trying to rebuild the grid. And as all the damage that occurred in Puerto Rico, customers being out, as I said, many for almost a year, it's very important that the grid be rebuilt. And PREPA, which is the utility, is a municipal utility, and so you get FEMA assistance. So recently we got $10.5 billion to rebuild the grid. So fundamentally, even not just in Puerto Rico, but nationwide, the grid is very fundamental for the production of electricity. In fact, I would say it's almost the lifeblood of our society. I truly believe that. And I've seen the grid evolve from a grid that was pretty archaic. I was around when the blackouts occurred in New York, when all the reliability organizations were created. But now we're in a grid that is becoming more digitized,
Mhm.
a grid that where the customer now can interact with that electricity grid. In fact, the National Academy of Sciences said one of the greatest achievements in the last 100 years has been the electricity grid.
Mhm.
It's a very complicated machine, and Morgan and I are going to try to simplify some elements of that grid and demonstrate to you how that grid is evolving with a linkage to telecommunications. We're going to talk more directly about how the customer is more involved, and we're going to talk about some of the new challenges. So I'm going to give Morgan a chance to say something. So for example, when you digitize, all of us know that right now we're very heavily tied to the internet, but we also know too, a new set of issues are created called cybersecurity. So while the grid, I think, is a vital platform, there are also some substantial new challenges that are created. So I'll shut up and let Morgan say a couple of opening comments, and then we can get into a real good dialogue.
Well, thank you, David. That's, I mean, I can listen and I'm taking notes. For the record, I'm one of these guys that when I hear something that I want to tweet about, I write it down. So you'll see a lot of this with you two talking. Before I allow Morgan to take over, I want to tee Morgan up because his career and what he's doing with Anterix now, if I can be so bold to say that he took telecom to another level when we needed it to, when we had natural disaster. And the term critical infrastructure, I know, Morgan, is something that's now in the DNA of Anterix, coming from the government where the 16 critical infrastructure sectors address or deal with things, David, that you brought out, weather, natural disaster, and now cyber physical attacks. It's a real thing. It's stuff we may not understand, but we know as consumers. In your comment about we are now prosumers of energy. We rely on this infrastructure to be safe, secure, resilient, et cetera. And I know Anterix is leading the way. And with that, Morgan, I would love to just reintroduce you as someone who gets it. And I'm digging the beard. And if you haven't heard Morgan O'Brien talk, make sure you do one day because he's infectious. So Morgan, what are your thoughts on those opening remarks from David?
Peter, David, what a pleasure to be alongside both of you. And let me apologize for my COVID scruffy look here. This is my gesture to COVID that not every decision that I want to make gets frustrated by COVID. I get to make at least a major change in my appearance. So that's part of my protest, COVID protest. Let me get to your question by starting saying. I've got 50 years. This is 2020 was my 50th year in telecom, and as a result of that career, I've been lucky to participate in a true revolution of mostly American technology driving just profound changes. And every single one of us has at least one, if not multiple, devices that are powered by the wireless industry. And it's been a rare privilege for me to do that. When I started on the path of Anterix, I talked to very smart people and said, how can I get to some of the leaders of the utility industry, critical infrastructure utility industry, to talk to them about a concept we have of using all of the developments that have taken place in the last decades in telecom to actually improve grid performance. And I was led to David Owens. That's how David and I first met. And I had just an amazing meeting with David in which we talked about everything imaginable, including his vision of the grid, the changes that were taking place in the grid, and his then Puerto Rico mission. So let me explain why somebody with a wireless background like myself had to meet David Owens and those like David to learn about the grid. And it's because as important as electricity is, and when you ask people to talk about life without electricity, they just stare at you blankly. So we are even more dependent on electricity now than we ever were. And so the question is, what's happening in that industry that might require an interconnection or a involvement of wireless, of somebody like Anterix? And what's happening is, as the drive to reduce carbon emissions causes centralized power generation to be less and less desirable, certainly less and less desirable as a percentage of the generation of electricity, distributed energy, and in particular, wind and solar and battery storage, those alternatives become more and more important. And we as a society and as consumers have to rely more and more on those alternative sources of power generation, complementary with diminishing centralized generation through the traditional means. And we're all straddling that transition that's taking place now. We read in the paper that one state or another has decided they're going to be carbon free by 2040 or 2050. Various companies have indicated they're going to be carbon free by 2030, 2025, whatever. That is not going to be possible. A comprehensive restructuring of the grid is not going to be possible without the use of wireless technologies as the last mile to provide situational awareness and connectivity, vast numbers of devices measuring what's going on in the grid and permitting decisions to be made virtually in real time about whether to connect or disconnect any particular source of power, so that if the sun is shining brightly, solar generators are producing net amounts of electricity that are feeding into the grid. But when the sun goes behind a cloud or at night, that situation reverses. Sometimes it's instantaneous, the reversal. And so there needs to be measurement of that, devices to measure that, sensors, digital sensors, the zeros and ones of the digital world have to be collected. They have to be collected wirelessly and then analyzed and used to make decisions.
So, David, I know you're itching. I'm going to tee you up with a thought, and I want to take away what I heard both of you address, and that's again to frame midway. Rebuilding the grid, constant evolution, digitization, Morgan leveraging telecom to transform the grid, Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things. For our audience today, we will encourage you to Google search, do whatever you have to do to understand really this ecosystem, because as these two gentlemen have pointed out, and I hope are articulated in such a way, I like to quote the DOE's definition of the United States electric grid is an engineering marvel, quote, with more than 9,200 electric generating units that have more than 1 million megawatts of generating capacity connected to more than 600,000 miles of transmission lines. And that's just the Ping Power pipe today. Morgan O'Brien and David referenced things that will be those innovations we talk about, microgrids. I'm looking at some of my notes here, energy storage, smart devices. It all needs spectrum. It needs the lines, it needs the poles, and as we use these devices every day, our phones, and rely on video communications, you got to trust and believe that these two gentlemen and the work that they've done in their careers are constantly evolving with this transformative grid that we're talking about. So, David, as much as feel free to comment on what Morgan addressed, but I think it's important if you can build off that, this grid reliability, grid resiliency. We've had the Energy Policy Act of 2005. You talked a lot about in our prep calls on FERC orders. 2222 now is very relevant. Can you speak to some of this ecosystem that's not just about the tech, but there are a lot of folks trying to regulate and help drive this innovation?
So I thought Morgan did a superb job, at least in framing this discussion. So when I look at the grid, I guess I look at three goals that we have when we look at the grid. And then I'm going to talk about how these goals are impacted by public policy and technology. One goal that Morgan spoke very strongly about was this whole notion of reliability. And there are many definitions of reliability, but very simplistically, keeping the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of that is called resiliency. If the lights go out, how quickly can you get them back on? A third part, which is kind of new, is physical and cyber security.
Mm.
Okay? The physical grid is one thing, but the parts that you can't see, the wavelengths and all of that, that's cyber security. That's where what Morgan said, that's where all his expertise, all the wireless technology, that's why that is critically important. The second thing that Morgan spoke to was clean energy. We call that sustainability. There is a tremendous movement for clean energy. And every company is being looked at by investors, by customers, to see what their environmental, social governance policies are. You hear the word ESG, environmental, social governance policies.
Mm.
And a third area that Morgan touched upon was affordability, which I think is critically important. In other words, before it was the utility with a central station plant, a large power plant that had the responsibility of providing energy to the customer through the grid, and the customer would respond and would get a bill. But today, okay, as Morgan said, customers can produce their own energy. That's called a distributed source.
Mm-hmm.
The customer can produce their own energy. In other words, the customer can manage their bills. The customer can deal with the issue of affordability. So more and more customers want to have clean energy. That means they want to put on rooftop solar. They want to be able to control how much energy they're using daily. That's called demand response. They can reduce their own demand. Okay, they can do that all through the internet, through wireless technology. So customers now have a bigger voice. And so what is occurring is we're moving increasingly from a centralized system to a system which has more distributive resources. So now this is where all the confusion comes. How do you manage a system that traditionally was one where the utility was the one that provided the energy and kept the lights on? Now where the customer also produces energy and feeds their excess onto the grid. It means that you have to have visibility. You have to be able to see what is occurring on that grid. That means you need to have sensors. You need to have monitors and all the stuff that Morgan provides. Okay, so this is interrelationship now. And not only that, you want some of that energy, some of the customers want that energy to be aggregated. They want somebody to link their energy with another customer, and there are public policies that are pushing that. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission recently came out with an order called 2222. And what that order does is it provides an impetus for integrating, for permitting these distributive resources to be aggregated and then to flow into the larger grid. And that's very significant. So the utility is sitting there saying, boy, is this getting complicated. I just used to have to worry about my sources. Now I got to worry about whether my sources are clean. I got to worry about whether when the sun rises or there's a storm, whether those sources can be relied on. I got to look down at what the customer is doing and how they're feeding into the grid. I got to look at all of that, and that impacts my planning. So I need to have something where I have visibility, where I have coordination, where I have control. Control is a dirty word. I'd rather say coordination, visibility, and let me think of a more positive word.
Orchestration. Orchestration.
Exactly. Very good word.
Very good.
Okay. So that's what I'm at now. So right now there's a discordance and I got to get everybody harmonized. And it's very, very complicated to do that.
Okay, so number one, Morgan, coming in with that, I have a qualifier, if you will. FERC Order 222 that David mentioned is participation of distributed energy resource aggregations and markets operated by regional transmission organizations and independent system operators, September 17th, 2020. Go read it. It's simple. They got a fact sheet. It talks a lot about transformation, and what Morgan here I know is going to jump in, because I think, Morgan, and this has been organic, folks, the network of networks is what the grid is. The network of networks is critical infrastructure that needs convergence of distributed energy and telecom and water and air. And Anterix, I know, is positioned well to help that communication flow. Can you speak a little bit about your quite often discussion around the network of networks and the role that private LTE, for example, can play in enabling that transformation?
Sure, Peter. Anterix owns valuable spectrum, radio spectrum, nationwide. And as a result of a very enlightened FCC decision just in 2020, a few months ago, that spectrum will be made available nationwide to take all of the gee-whiz functionality that manages and performs every day on your laptop and on your cell phone. That gee-whiz technology can be adapted and tailored to this very challenging time in the life cycle of the electric utility industry and the electric grid. It's being pounded by external forces for change. However, we believe that the current utilities, the investor-owned utilities and the other utilities, do a unbelievable job considering the challenges. Think of the number of times that you flip a switch and don't get electricity. It's extremely rare, and that's because of all the work that's being done behind the scenes. So our objective at Anterix is to make this precious federal resource, this spectrum, available to the utility industry so that they can connect all of the various points of information gathering, the sensors and others, of which there will ultimately be many millions, to connect those inexpensively so that they can be then massaged and analyzed and produce real-time decision making. Now, let me just make one point that I think is tremendously important. It's a point of distinction. When you pick up your cell phone, for the most part, what you want is to get connected as quickly as possible through the internet to wherever on God's planet that you want to get. That is what that device is designed to do. When these sensors are deployed by the utilities, they don't have that same requirement. And in fact, they really don't want that same vulnerability of being connected to the internet, because the internet is a vast opportunity for cyber mischief. So we talk about private networks. And a private network gives the orchestra conductor total autonomy to run and do whatever he needs to do to keep that network functioning, optimizing the delivery of power at the lowest possible cost without incurring any extra vulnerability for cyber mischief, which we all know is omnipresent. Every single day, the major utilities in the United States are attacked relentlessly, probing for weak spots. And you can only imagine that at some point, some bad actor is going to seek to knock out a large portion of the United States power. So all of us need to be prepared. We need to take the tools that we really take for granted on the consumer side and adapt them for enterprise. That's really the thing that gets me most excited as Anterix, after all the years of helping wireless perform these miracles for the consumer. Now we can take it to, I think, an even more important purpose, which is to keep enterprise, critical infrastructure functioning reliably with resilience and with the absolute, there's no such thing as perfect protection from cyber attacks. That will never happen, but you can significantly improve it.
Absolutely. And David, coming back to you here, we're going to tap into some of the real life, why should I care? We're going to talk a little bit about Puerto Rico. So get that exemplar ancillary anecdote storyline top of mind, because I want to summarize. Morgan, you used some great words. First of all, I love cyber mischief. I'm going to take that one, but give you all the credit. I like that you avoided saying control, but orchestrating with technologies and aggregating that information so we can do something good with it. And again, I understand control is not and should not be synonymous with private LTE, but it does give you those utilities and anybody an opportunity to have a primary or a secondary ability to manage and make sure the lights are kept on. And
in fact, I'm not nearly as careful as David. I say electric utilities, in my experience, are control freaks, and they have to.
Okay,
we are.
That's tweetable.
I certainly hope they are.
Yeah. Okay, so David, I'm going to steal a line I saw because I'm a man not of my own quotes but others, and I love giving credit. This one though was anonymous, and I can't remember where I read it, but whoever did it on the internet, I thought it was great. Resiliency directly impacts reliability. You talked about grid reliability as, by definition, at least I found it to be the ability of the electric power system to deliver electricity in the quantity and with the quality demanded by users. Resilience, I like what you said, we got to keep the lights on. The ability for the electric power system to withstand and recover from extreme damaging conditions, like Morgan talked about, be it cyber physical, or David, as you said, weather, natural disasters. Superstorm Sandy, Deepwater Horizon, Katrina, Puerto Rico, the floods, the Michigan, the PG&E. This is the stuff that happened. Yeah.
Wildfires, that's right.
Wildfires. That's the stuff that happens, physical infrastructure. And then we, as I like to say in my former life, we realize how at risk we are. So Morgan used the words risk mitigation. There's no silver bullet to this, folks. It's technology will help and enable, but it takes the ecosystem. David, Puerto Rico, what are we learning from that? And what are you excited about in terms of some of the promise to build some of the resiliency back into that country and then maybe our country?
I guess the greatest thing in working in Puerto Rico, it's really a culmination of everything I've done in my career. It's a very complicated system. It's an analog system, not digitized, no smart meters, and no advanced distribution management systems. All the things that Morgan spoke to, sensors and monitors that give you visibility, and I'll use the word control. Well, we don't really have that in Puerto Rico. And so when the hurricanes hit and we looked at the system and the upgrades that we said, let's not build the system back the way it was. Let's build the system much better. Let's build a system so it can withstand a Category 4 storm. It's kind of a hurdle. And then we said, but more importantly, we want to attract businesses back to Puerto Rico. One of the biggest things that upsets commercial and industrial customers is this whole notion of resiliency. Something happens, we recover quick enough. And these are critical loads. Hospitals, companies, very critical loads. So how can we insulate, or how can we do a better job in providing resilience after a major storm? We said, well, let's divide grids. Mini grids, a source of energy, customers connected to it, but it still ties into the major grid. But if you get a storm, rather than the whole island going down, sections of the island would go down and other sections would stay up. And in fact, we would have the ability to restore much quicker those areas that have gone down, because your network is so designed that it makes it quicker to make those improvements. So that's what we're doing. We said, let's move to clean energy. Let's move increasingly to solar energy, come off of oil, come off of central station plants, have natural gas as a transition fuel, because as Morgan said, the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow hard enough. So you need to make sure that you have power when the customer flips the switch, it's there. But when you get a storm, you also need to have it so you can recover from that storm quickly. So we said build microgrids. So that's what we're doing. We're dividing the island up. We're building 8 microgrids. We're strengthening the major grid. Okay, we've got to strengthen that, but we're building these little mini grids. Okay, and we're going to source of energy surrounding them. And one vital source of energy we're going to have is renewable. It's going to be natural gas backup, because we think that's critically important. I think if we're able to do that, and then we're giving customers smart meters. And with AMI, what does AMI means that they have a digital connection with the utility. The utility can see at all times what customers are on, what customers are off, and the customers themselves can interact with the utility. So we're doing that. And that's revolutionary in Puerto Rico, to have all that technology now at the customer's fingerprint, and at the same commercial customers, industrial customers, giving them the now storm, their mechanisms don't have to shut down. They don't have to shut down their businesses for weeks and have people unemployed. So that's what we're trying to do.
Well, that paints a picture, and sorry, there's a little bit of noise here in the background, but we'll take care of that. Hey, there you go, infrastructure at work, right? We're having this conversation, but it's timely. David, I appreciate that, and you talked about, we talked about a network of networks, and thank God it's not one switch to bring it down. Our network was not designed in such a way, at least in the United States. We've seen brownouts and blackouts, and thank God the whole country doesn't go on. We know what happened with Ukraine, and people like to say, oh, the sky is falling. I don't want this new internet protocol, the IT side of the IT/OT world. And again, I'm sorry for throwing those acronyms out, but you're talking about transformation, and I'm going to pivot back to Morgan, because we used words like sustainability through energy efficient and renewable resources. We talked about flexibility, so that uncertainty of conditions, and by no means I feel we're pressing, when it comes to generation, transmission, and distribution, folks, generation is the starting point, and that could be, fossil or renewable fuels, dams, water, wind, coal, solar. We have to leverage it all to build that resiliency and, if you will, to some extent, redundancy. So Morgan, when I come from my world of an IT kind of guy, and I embrace the internet, and I do, and I know the power and promise, it does bring risk. And the operational technology, a lot of, David, which you spoke to, the SCADA systems, the industrial control systems, the infrastructure that works, it works, and it's worked for century. You start getting excited about this next generation. And when you start introducing the ideas of 5G or private LTE, and you have to kind of understand 900 versus this, because there's reasons that utilities use certain bands of the radio spectrum and frequency. But Morgan, you come from this telecom background, you know how it works, and you know the promise of it. We've seen the telecommunication industry evolve unbelievably. And now the utility sector has an opportunity to ride that wave, or, not overnight, but embrace that transformation. If I could be bold on this one, Morgan, what have been some of the challenges for a guy like you trying to just say, look, I'm not selling snake oil here. It's like, there is opportunity. What's it been like?
Well, let's start by talking about a perfect world.
Okay.
We don't live in, but in a perfect world, the incredibly important electric utility industry in the United States would receive from the government exclusive use spectrum of the very best kind. Not all spectrum is equal. So the very best spectrum would be made available exclusively for the utility industry. People who have a little bit of history may know that, maybe 10 years ago, I made the same argument about public safety. And what actually ended up happening is that the federal government did make exclusive use spectrum available public safety, and there's now something called FirstNet as a result. Something that, you know, the industry is extremely proud of. Lives are saved, I think, every day because of it. Unfortunately, because it's not a perfect world, there is no available spectrum that government can make available exclusively to the electric utility industry. They just don't do that anymore. What they do instead is they auction the spectrum off, and then the spectrum is put into the use that the winner of the auction considers the highest use. So we're in a situation, an imperfect world, and what a company like Anterix offers, and I guess my frustration is it's no more frustration than anyone experiences if they're trying to introduce something brand new, particularly to an industry that is so beset by challenges that we've been describing. And so you have to try to, if you're Anterix, you have to say, we're positioned with an asset, and we're positioned with a very intense knowledge of where technology has been driven commercially in the world by 4G and 5G, where 4G is and where 5G is going. And we see an absolutely unique opportunity for this industry to individually adopt our spectrum and use current and future technologies to give them situational awareness and connectivity. And then we see an opportunity for the industry collectively to develop a network of networks to significantly increase economies of scale, mutual aid, and a number of other tremendous benefits. So I want to be careful in saying that, of course, I'm immensely proud of us and what we're doing, and my team at Anterix. We think we're the absolute best solution out there, and that's our narrative. And we go to people like David and others, and we tell our story, and hopefully our story gets through. And as David knows, Anterix has spectrum in Puerto Rico, and we're hoping that we'll be able to play a role in the truly amazing work he and others are doing there. And if you lived through the aftermath of the hurricane and the devastation that was wrought in Puerto Rico, you can't not want to help. So that's the worst possible outcome of wide-scale loss of the grid. And what wireless does, and what the deployment of these sensors does, is it allows the central organizing authority to know what's happening while it's happening and fix it. We talk about the example of wildfires. Literally, most wildfires are started when a live wire hits dry brush and there's a conflagration and nobody's around to see it, and it's out of control before anybody knows it's happened. The time it takes for a wire to fall is 1.4 seconds. With this new technology and the sensors that are available, the central authority can know that that's happening and deactivate the line within the 1.4 seconds. That's just how amazing these technologies are. And this is just where the technology is now in 2020. It's just amazing where it's going to be driven globally. And we're saying critical infrastructure, utilities in particular, can piggyback off that. The world, the consumers of the world, billions of devices are driving technology to more and more amazing feats. And this industry is going to be able to just take advantage of that. It's truly remarkable. And I guess my frustration is it takes a long time to get a message out in today's world. It just takes a long time.
So David, I'm going to come back because of a little bit of the role at EEI that you had, and I'm going to throw out a few acronyms just because, like I said, it's 1:41 and we could talk for hours. I think we can. You're doing incredible education. Everybody's getting a PhD in understanding critical infrastructure from these folks. Morgan, well stated, and I appreciate your passion. I know this, that if people can take away what you said, which is, it's not about the technology. It's, hey, folks, drive around and look at those communities that still have wires, the poles in our communities with trees hanging over them. Morgan brought up an incredible point where predictive analytics can help save life. Okay. I don't live in Northern California. I saw it on the news and I was just like, my God. And then I drive through my community in Maryland and see, why are they trimming those trees? Because Mother Nature can create the havoc and loss of life, and technology is not the problem. Anterix, the work with microgrids in Puerto Rico, thank God we have that. I like to say technology underpins the 16 sectors which allow our cities to be safe, secure, and enhance life. So that's my little pontification. David, EEI, representing all U.S. investor-owned electric companies. NERC, overseeing and regulating the reliability of the North American electric grid. FERC, regulating the interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil. I can go on and on. What was it like in EEI being not just a member, but hey, collaboration is what it takes, and not having sort of a predisposed notion of technology. We don't need that in our backyard. Can you explain to the audience that, hey, there's collaboration happening, but it doesn't happen overnight?
Yes, there is collaboration happening. And I know in my role at Edison Electric Institute, I had the responsibility, among others, working very closely with our Congress, working closely with the federal agencies, one that you named, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, working very closely with state public service commissions. And it required me to have dialogues with all of them. The things that Morgan said about us being able to enhance our grid modernization, that's my term, not yours. If you're trying to make your grid more resilient, if you're trying to make your grid such that you have sensors and monitors and can do things in real time, as Morgan said, it requires an investment in infrastructure. In fact, a significant investment in infrastructure. And I think that's where it gets challenging. So not only do you have to be able to get the approval of the individual state utility commissioners, but if you're building lines and you're upgrading lines, you have to go to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You have to work with the environmental community if you're siting things, and all the things that Morgan said. If you're trying to make your system a Class A system, it requires you spending a little bit more money than you would if you were building a traditional system. So Morgan is right about us owning our own spectrum, having our own private networks. I'm a strong believer and supporter of that, okay? But there are many regulators who are not, and who think we're gold plating the system, and that this is not necessary. And all the things that Morgan said, I know in Puerto Rico, one of the biggest things in Puerto Rico was vegetation management, okay? And we didn't know who was out, we didn't know anything. But if we had what Morgan said, it would have saved a lot of money, okay?
And life, and lives.
So I'm not gonna mention a company, but there's a company in Florida who spent a lot of money to do these things. And they've proven that they can bring back service quickly after a major hurricane. So we have to convince all the public policy makers and the environmental community that this is tremendously beneficial to the public interests. And that's the word, public interest. Public interest is affected, okay? And we have to demonstrate that we are protecting the public interest. We're enhancing the public interest by these investments in this major new infrastructure. And that's the rub. And that's what I did at EEI. And it was like banging your head. I testified in a lot of state proceedings on grid modernization. And I got my head handed to me quite a bit. And it wasn't that they didn't understand, because I try to make it very simplistic. It's that they didn't believe.
Mm.
Okay? They did not believe. And that's the challenge we have.
Okay, Morgan, I see you nodding. I want you to comment on some of this, but I want to say this. The term grid modernization, there is a grid modernization initiative, folks, in our country. It's the DOE working across landscapes with, and I failed to mention, not that I'm trying to exclude, but the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, significant stakeholders in this. Morgan, your company, your team helped work with one of our academic, national treasures, the labs, to look at advanced distribution management systems. Can you comment, or would you like to comment on some of what David was saying?
Yes, I would. I can remember in high school, particularly that civics was one of our subjects, and typically it would be in the afternoon after lunch, and I'd be like dozing off, like civics, the federal government, the state government, the balance of power, oh my God, who cares? Now I wish I had paid more attention, because what we're going to see as Americans is we're going to see a rebalancing of the federal and state jurisdictions over the production and delivery of electricity. Probably, in the end, a very beneficial increased federal role, because what we're thinking, what at Anterix we're predicting, is that the federal government is going to begin to incentivize behavior to improve the grid with money. And that will address the very real problem that David just described. It's very expensive to acquire spectrum and to deploy technology like this. Very expensive. We're not talking millions, we're talking billions. Billions of dollars will be necessary. Of course, those billions of dollars get amortized over maybe 20 years of useful life, but still, we're very familiar with what David was talking about. The regulator, particularly the state regulator, that doesn't want to believe that significant rate increases on their watch are going to be necessary, because that's really not what the state regulators are put in place to do. A lot of them, I believe, really are thought of as how to avoid increasing rates, because the rates show up in your energy bill every month, and nobody ever calls their representative to say, I was so happy to notice my electric bill went up this month. So we're going to see government which has basically addressed the challenge of providing cheap and universal electricity, reliable, resilient, et cetera. We're going to see government change the way it looks at that. I think when you pay attention in January, February, March, from a bipartisan standpoint, we may see the federal government with the new Biden administration and Congress putting significant resources to work to help address this problem. It will be a change, because typically the bulk of the capital comes through the states and through rate-making procedures at the states and show up in your electric bill. But I mean, every electric user is also a citizen, a tax-paying citizen. So it's really a question of which pocket it comes out of.
Yeah, I mean, well stated. And again, with for those of you who have watched an Industry Insights, we're going to save the last 5 or so minutes for some parting shots. And I think introducing there the concept of our cities of the future, Morgan. Smart cities is something people say, oh yeah, you know what that is. Well, we're here to say, and I hope we helped you today, folks, understand you don't go down to pick your store, big box store, buy a thing and say, I'm going to plug it in and now I'm a smart home and everything's hunky dory. No, it doesn't work that way. David and Morgan, you both have helped, I think, showcase that this ecosystem or articulate is complex. I think the term that really works for me is that, when you think about understanding how electricity energy is generated, transmitted, and distributed, that it involves asset owners and manufacturers and service providers. That's why we have sectors, and no sector is the same. And you know, David, we talk about, hey, I'm no spring chicken here, okay? I'm not speaking for you two young guys, but I'm going to tell you that there's a 21st century workforce.
That's right.
That millennials, whatever you want, the internet is part of the life. It's part of the infrastructure. And we've danced a bit with this smart grid concept. And I hope that people understand that the integration of the old legacy with the new is exciting and can be nerve-wracking. Morgan said it earlier, mitigating risk is the goal, creating resilience, David pointed out. So given that ecosystem, David, you know, I know that having read a bit about your background and the emergence of, you know, the American Association of Blacks in Energy spoke to me. Can you tell me a little bit about where that's going, and is there some of that tied to this workforce that's emerging that needs to understand our legacy infrastructure so we can create a better life for our human being?
Association of Blacks in Energy. I'm a very active member. Organization been in existence for close to 40 years. And what they do a number of things. First, they want to have a seat at the public policy table. So many of the things that we spoke to, that Morgan and I spoke to, and you know, Morgan made a very compelling argument that the federal government will get more involved. Well, the American Association of Blacks in Energy wants to make sure that people of color are also involved in the conversation because their communities are impacted. The American Association of Blacks in Energy also wants young people to get into the energy area. They said there is a vast field now that can open to you, which is very, very exciting. All aspects of energy, and particularly, I'm biased, electricity. There are tremendous opportunities for you to get gainful employment, and it's an exciting area. So they do that. We act as mentors. We act as sponsors. Okay, that's very, very vital. We have scholarship program. And the whole concept of the American Association of Blacks in Energy is to recognize the diversity in energy production, transmission, and all the elements tied to energy. And it's to really give them an active seat at the table and to give recognition. It's an international association, chapters all across the United States, and they have a very strong presence in many states.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that speaks to, again, what the federal government on the IT side of the house with the current agenda towards modernizing our government. The 21st century workforce is critical, and hopefully that folks are learning today about, you know, not just buying and the snazzy new thing, but understanding the work that's been pioneered by you two gentlemen. Okay, Morgan, you get the first shot here. Okay, I'm going to suck 5 seconds out of the air, maybe 10, for your parting shot. Tweetable moments, the discussion covered a canvas today. What would you like to leave with this audience?
Technology is more than just fun. It's more than just entertainment. It's the handmaid of all of the crucial things that we rely on as citizens. So those of us who work in technology are privileged to adapt it to new and innovative uses.
Wonderful. I know there's more there, but folks, just passion speaking there. David Owens, you have the floor. Parting shots.
Okay, so I'll just say to everyone that electricity, being in the electric industry is probably the most exciting thing to be. And the grid, as I started out, the grid is one of the most significant scientific achievements of the century.
Amen.
And we are moving now to another dimension of that through data analytics, through artificial intelligence, through all the network of networks, as Morgan said. We're integrating several different types of technology so that we can provide resilience and reliability. Very, very exciting time. And everything that has taken place today is transformative for society. It's going to add comfort. It's going to permit everyone to have the opportunity to manage their own electricity usage. It's going to lead to a greater electrification, use of electric vehicle. It's going to lead to a cleaner environment. And I think that is great for the American public.
High five to you both. My parting shot is facts tell and stories sell. You two are true trailblazers, you're storytellers, you're dot connectors. Again, I failed to mention, if you're wondering what the heck's dots and bridges, it's all about connecting dots and building bridges and creating what I like to say or generating a light bulb moment or two. And you did that today. One of my favorite quotes is from, the incredible Maya Angelou, and she said, right, it's not what you said, it's not what you did, it's but how you made people feel. I'll tell you what, today I do feel educated and informed and enlightened. I will hope that you two continue to beat that drum and teach and coach and mentor. I'd love to watch and hear and contribute it in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I kind of do that in my other life too. So, but big thank you to you both and to our audience, and we look forward to our next episode. So thanks for everybody.
Peter, David in particular, thank you so much.
Well, thank you as well, Morgan. Appreciate it, Peter.